Good afternoon, everyone.
Добрий день усім.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished ambassadors, distinguished guests, thank you all for coming today.
Пане спікер, панове посли, шановні гості, дуже дякую вам всім, що завітали сьогодні.
I've decided to give a short speech, and I'm going to read it straight through. Those of you who need interpretation, my staff has a translation of it in Ukrainian. Just let them know, and they'll be happy to give you a copy of that.
Я виголошу невеличку промову, і щоб не перебивати її перекладом, тому, кому переклад потрібний, закликаю звернутися до наших працівників. У них є копії роздруковані цієї промови українською мовою. Скористайтесь ними. Дякую.
I do very much appreciate your taking time to help us today to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the tragic events which took place in the United States on September 11th of 2001. This anniversary is a very emotional one for many of us, particularly for the families who mourn the loss of their loved ones and who still cannot comprehend why they innocently fell victim to the barbarism of terrorists in New York, in Washington, or in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. This anniversary also provides those of us who are alive the opportunity to reflect on what happened that day and to rededicate ourselves to doing whatever we can, each in our own way, to prevent such horrible actions from taking place again. That is the true purpose of our meeting here today, and it's also the underlying purpose of the exhibition of photographs that you see around you in this gallery. 9/11 is one of those unique days which all of us remember in detail. None of us will ever forget what we were doing the moment when we first heard of the attack. Many will remember watching on TV with horror the second plane hit the World Trade Center and the collapse of the two towers a little later in the morning. Almost 3,000 innocent men, women, and children from over 70 countries died in the 9/11 attacks. 67 British citizens died that day, 23 Japanese, 15 Mexicans, and the list goes on. A citizen of Ukraine died, one from Moldova, one from Russia, and many others from countries which the ambassadors who are here today represent. 411 rescue workers gave their lives trying to save the thousands of people who eventually escaped the Twin Towers before they collapsed. Time and again, I'm drawn back to the very human stories of courage, sacrifice, and love exhibited that day. It seems, to me at least, that the best way to comprehend the enormity of the tragedy is to look at the individual victims and their families. These are heartbreaking stories, but stories with which each of us can identify. The family of our own political counselor, Colin Cleary, knew the pain of 9/11 firsthand. Colin's brother lost his fiancée that very day. Beth Logler was 31. She had just picked out her wedding band. She died with 657 colleagues in the offices of Cantor Fitzgerald in the South Tower. Colin, let me extend to you our condolences on behalf of all of us here. I watched a program on American television last week which profiled some of the victims who worked in Windows on the World restaurant on the 107th floor of the North Tower. Among the 76 employees who perished that day was a sous chef from Puerto Rico and a chef's assistant from Bangladesh. His wife, a devout Muslim who still lives in New York with her two children, shared in an interview how much she missed her husband, and she spoke eloquently about the true nonviolent nature of her Islamic faith. I would mention to you that the man who managed and owned that restaurant happened to be late for work that day and so escaped with his life. But on this same program, he said he has raised $22 million to not only support the families of those who died, but to put every single one of the children of those employees through high school and university. I've been reading over and over again the stories about the last phone calls of people in the airplanes or in the towers after the planes hit. Facing death, their last thoughts were with their loved ones. One story, which I will never forget, was about an Hispanic family in New York. The husband worked in the World Trade Center. That morning, he went to work as usual, and his wife went to the local laundromat to wash the family's clothes. When she heard that the first plane had crashed into the World Trade Center, she desperately tried to call her husband on his cell phone, but could not get through. She rushed home and found that in the meantime, her husband had called on a landline and had talked to their young daughter. The little girl told her mommy that her daddy had called to say that he wanted her to know he loved her. The little girl reported, and here I'm quoting, "He say, Mommy, he love you. No matter what happens, he love you." It was 9:02 a.m. and he never called again. So this is not just a day of mourning for Americans, but for the whole world. As we think about America's acute day of tragedy, our hearts also go out to the families of innocent victims of other terrorist attacks in Nairobi, Bali, or Belfast, Mumbai, Tel Aviv, or Moscow, London, Lahore, Madrid, and sadly too many other places. We honor the memory of the victims, and we honor the resilience of their families, their determination to go on and to make the best of their lives for themselves and for their children. I think it's also important today that we reflect on our response to 9/11. Over the last 10 years, the international community has worked together to reduce the threat of terrorism. We have sharply reduced the capability of terrorists through our combined efforts. I know we all remain committed to working together to defeat violent extremists and to address the root causes of dissatisfactions that can breed terrorism. The truth is that the terrorists have fundamentally failed to achieve their goals. People in many nations have shown that they are stronger than fear. In many countries, ordinary people are showing that nonviolent political change is possible, and that violent extremism is not, as the terrorists believe, the only way to create enduring political and social change. We see abundant evidence of resilience everywhere. Rather than being paralyzed by the violence of a tiny minority, the vast majority of people are focused on pursuing better lives for themselves and for their children. They are reaching greater levels of education, creating new economic opportunities, and working to improve their political system. Obviously, much more remains to be done, but we should not ignore what we have achieved or the efforts which are still very much in progress. On September 11th, 2001, I was in Washington, D.C. At that time, I was the American ambassador to Lithuania, and I had flown home to participate in a meeting in the Oval Office at the White House, scheduled that afternoon between Lithuanian President Valdas Adamkus and President Bush. Obviously, that meeting was postponed, but I have very poignant memories of evacuating the State Department after the hijacked American Airlines Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. We did not know at that time that United Flight 93 was still in the air and actually headed toward Washington, D.C. But the fear of additional strikes was palpable. I also remember my own personal overwhelming relief when I got my daughter on the phone. My daughter at that time worked at a law firm in New York, and fortunately she had not yet left on her daily subway ride from Brooklyn, which took her under the World Trade Center to her office in Midtown. I was never so happy that lawyers at big law firms start their daily work a bit later than most of the rest of us. I also remember calling my wife, who was in Lithuania, before the phone systems in Washington totally failed, to tell her that all of us were safe. I remember returning to Lithuania and experiencing the tremendous outpouring of sympathy and solidarity from the people there. I know from my own staff, who have shared memories of that time with me, that a similar outpouring of heartfelt condolence and sympathy occurred here in Ukraine. People were shocked by the senseless attacks. Many people came to the embassy to write messages, to bring flowers, to sign their names in a special book set up for that purpose. One colleague who was traveling in those days in Kharkiv with a group of Americans from Cincinnati. They were in Kharkiv to open a new American information center. As news of the attacks reached them, of course they were shocked and uncertain. Americans and Ukrainians sat down and watched the news on television together at the new information center, hardly able to believe what they were seeing. As the day went on, many local citizens in Kharkiv called or came to the center to express their indignation at the attack and to offer support to the American people. Having lived in Ukraine for some time now and gotten to know the people here, I can easily imagine that wonderful reaction coming spontaneously from so many people. I also know that that outpouring of sympathy occurred in so many other capitals all over the world. That kind of genuine human response is what binds us together and makes us all stronger in the face of tragedy. And I will tell you, for me personally, but I think for all of my colleagues, we never will forget those gestures of sympathy and support on that horrible, horrible day. We are fortunate today to be able to hold this commemoration here at this gallery to show you the photos of Ivan Dudkin, a longtime friend of our embassy, who has traveled throughout the United States as a photographer many times. Ivan tells us that he was always drawn to and fascinated by the images of the Twin Towers. His photo exhibit will be open to the public until September 19th. These photos are not of the events of 9/11, but they capture the enduring quality and strength of the city and people of New York, both before and after the attacks. So thank you, Ivan. I also want to thank Andrei Shabikin, the president of the Academy, as well as Vice President Ihor Bezgin and the whole staff for their generosity and partnership in putting this photographic exhibit together. I want to close with one last thought. When I returned to Lithuania after the tragic events of September 11th, I was given a hand-carved statue, wooden statue, of a seated, contemplative Jesus Christ. Those of you who know Lithuania know that statues like this are called rūpintojalas. They are an important symbol of faith for all Lithuanians. On the bottom of the statue, the man who carved it and sent it to me wrote the following message, quote, "To the President, the Ambassador, and to the American people, with knowledge and wisdom, you can save the world." That statue has been on my desk for the last 10 years at every post that I have served at. It remains for me my own personal inspiration, but I think it can be an inspiration for all of us, to help guide all of us as we try, each in our own way, to make this a safer and a better world. With that thought, I would ask you now to please join me in a moment of silence to honor all of those who perished on 9/11 and their families. Thank you very much.